Welcome to Forest Chat, where we talk about individual endeavour in Western Australia, what it takes, what it means, and how you do it. I'm your host, Paul Vandermeer, and in today's episode, we're talking with Barry Green about operating a radio station. Barry trained as a radio technician back in the day and has lived a life involved in all sorts of communications and broadcasts. Welcome to Forest Chat, Barry.
G'day Paul, lovely to be here.
Barry, thank you for coming on the show. It's you do a lot of work in this space and it's very much appreciated by the community, so props to you for that.
Thank you.
Barry, a radio station. What on earth is a radio station and what are you involved with as a radio station operator?
Well, I guess there's two aspects to it. My training was a radio tech in last century and I worked in the government, Department of Aviation, so I learned radio, and in that time I spent 2 years on Cocos Island as a tech, and got involved with community radio there, and I saw what a powerful community building tool community radio was. After Cocos, I ended up as a tech at GWN Television in Bunbury, again, it was a local TV station broadcasting all over regional Western Australia, and I got a buzz out of that, and I actually developed equipment that allowed them to insert separate ads in Kalgoorlie, Geraldton and Albany, because I got a buzz out of that, because I've always had a sense of community and a sense of localism. Anyway, after 14 years at GWN, it became obvious there wasn't going to be a job there much longer, and at that stage we had our farm at Donnybrook and we had a farm state, so I'd got involved in tourism. And I was looking around for something else, and I came across tourist radio and talked to the bloke who owned the business and had a conversation. It all starts with a conversation, and we ended up buying Western Tourist Radio in 2001 against my wife's better judgment, and she was right, of course. But anyway, so I got involved in that, and the vision was to create a little radio station to tell local stories. So Western Tourist Radio is our private company. We have what they call LPON licences, low power open narrowcast. So they low power, they have a limited range, that's a fact of life, nothing I can do about that. Open means anybody could listen, narrowcast means that not everybody would want to. And so one of the approved formats is tourist radio, which is a repeating loop. We can be up to 4 hours in duration, so it's about telling local stories essentially. And that's been very challenging. We developed it alongside the website, which I think has potential, but my background is I'm a radio tech and an organic farmer, and I'm not a marketer, so that's been a bit problematic. But anyway, out of that, in 2011, a couple of different people came to me in Donnybrook to say, you know a bit about radio, how do we get a community radio station going? So community radio is very different. It can only be owned by an incorporated body. So we had a public meeting, we formed a committee in 2011, Baling Up Community Radio got incorporated, but then we had to find somewhere that we could locate the equipment. I was involved in Lions in Donnybrook, and after some years of getting nowhere, we put a proposal to Lions to allow us to annex part of the Lions den, and so we were able to progress, and we got Donnybrook Baling Up Community Radio on air in 2016 without any government funding, I'm proud to say. But then we did get some Lotteries Commission funding which bought the automation equipment. So that was stage one. It meant we were on air with a limited range because we just had a transmitter in the studio and a stick on the roof, as they say, the antenna. So we got in good signal in Donnybrook but didn't go far past that. And then we ended up getting a government grant, $30,000 for the transmitter up on the hill, which we got on air in 2018. We actually got $30,000 for that, but we did it ourselves and did the job for $21,000. And that got on air in the day before Anzac Day 2018, and because we hadn't spent all the money on the Donnybrook transmitter, the government allows us to use the balance on the Baling Up transmitter. So we got Baling Up 98.5 on air in 2020, just before the world shut down because of bad flu season that year.
So it sounds like there's a range of different things that you need to bring together. There's the equipment, and we haven't even talked about what gets broadcast, but there are a range of these around the state, is that right?
So the tourist radio, I think I was the only one operating tourist radio in Western Australia anymore. A lot of the licences have been acquired by Christian broadcasters. So a lot of the 87.6s will be religious programming, one of two different outfits. Some are used by the TAB and other niche music things. Community radio stations in the southwest is Harvey, Bunbury, Collie, Donnybrook, Balingup, Margaret River and Augusta. They are all operated by local community. We all belong to the Community Broadcast Association of Australia, which is the, industry representative body, but that they are all local incorporated bodies, and their program is determined by the local community. So they are all a voice for community and small business at a time, I'd argue, when the mainstream media has become the voice of the big. So you've got to look at where the money comes from. The advertising from mainstream media is coming from advertising from big food, big ag, big gambling, big banks, big retail, big real estate, big pharma, big government. and as a result of that, they seem to have lost their capacity to question any of those things.
Absolutely. Whereas for your exposures, where does your advertising come from?
Well, that's in the tourist radio. We do have to sell advertising. Although I hate the word advertising, I like saying we're selling the ability to tell a story, and people visiting the southwest, it's the small businesses that provide the unique experiences, and they're the sort of stories we want to tell. So if anybody's listening to this who does operate a unique local business, we'd welcome the opportunity to tell your story, and that will be on the radio. But it's also the game changes now that we can have all this program content online. There's SoundCloud, podcast, and created playlists. So if you're listening in Bunbury, you hear the local Bunbury and hinterland stories. If you go to touristradio.com.au/Bunbury, at the top there's a link to the on-air button. If you press that, you'll actually get a playlist of the Bunbury stories, which includes the Forest Chat story I recorded with you. So it's sort of the limitation of tourist radio has always been a limited range. But because it's how the internet's democratised the media, you hear these small business stories online anywhere on the planet now.
So radio has really had a change of definition, hasn't it? There's the broadcast, which from a central point gets pushed out there and anyone with a receiver can listen to it. So that's what radio started as,
yep.
I guess. But now we've got all these alternative opportunities to listen to the same stuff,
yep.
but in a more flexible way, isn't it? When you talk about playlists, you can pick and choose out of your playlist and do all those things that you're used to doing with listening to music.
Absolutely, and the tourist radio is primarily a talk program, although we do have a local talent type segment, so we can talk to musicians and play their songs. But the challenge with radio, it's very hard to measure how many people are listening. The corporations do surveys, and I suspect that the results of those surveys are probably about as accurate as a prediction of the American election. But with the data stuff, you can be very analytical, and there's a lot of people say if you can't measure something, it doesn't exist, and they've convinced themselves of that, which really is, I think, a load of bollocks. Because, if people are driving into Busselton, they're approaching the Busselton Margaret River tourism region, the big 87.6 tourist radio sign on the highway, locals probably don't see it anymore, but people driving down for the first time very likely do see it, and some will listen, I can't tell you how many, and they'll hear things that, they probably won't hear elsewhere. And we're in such an interesting period in history because I think Robert Kennedy says people have to hear something from 5 different people before they change their view of something. And by putting things on our program that you won't hear in the mainstream media, you never know if we're going to be the first or the 5th time somebody hears something that changes their view. And that's what I find exciting. And as I mentioned, I'm involved in regenerative agriculture, and I've coined the term regenerative media as a play on regenerative agriculture. And you're part of Regen Media, and the Light Australia is part of Regen Media. Michael Gray Griffith, Graham Hood and Johnny Larder with Club Grubbery, and Dr. John Campbell, a podcaster who's he's actually a nurse by profession, but he's been a medical educator all his life, and he's got a couple of million followers, much more than the ABC, and he's got some fantastic interviews. One is with, and I've rebroadcast some of his on my Donnybrook Bailing Up community radio show. One very interesting interview John's got is with Professor Robert Clancy, and I'm going to be talking to him on my Donnybrook Bailing Up community radio show next Wednesday on business and community conversation. So, and the byline of that is it all starts with a conversation. As humans, we're supposed to talk to each other. And, we've got this situation where we're shouting at each other on social media. Nobody's listening. We've got two ears and one mouth for a reason. And, people don't know what they don't know. And so the byline to my Donnybrook Bailing Up community radio business and community conversations is it all starts with a conversation. And that's broadcast on 102.1 Donnybrook, which gets moderately well into Bunbury and Bustleton, but it's also streamed. So all the Community Broadcast Association stations are on the Community Radio Plus app. If you download the Community Radio Plus, you can listen to community stations anywhere in Australia, and they're all a local voice from a local perspective. If you're listening to that, it'll actually find the nearest station. And if from a tourism point of view, if you're travelling around Australia, you're much better off listening to a local community station than one of the corporate networks. Because what's happened, and it happened to me at GWN, the media in regional Australia, radio, print and TV, has been acquired by the corporations and essentially shut down. The community radio is the last bastion of a local voice, and as I said, they're a voice for community and small business, and it's an exciting place to be.
You talk about the community conversations that you have, and that leads me into the next question, which is like, Barry, what does it take you to operate a radio station? And I'm really interested to hear about what it takes you to get these people onto the stations.
Yeah, figuring out the business model's been a challenge, but people that are passionate about what they're doing, they're happy to talk, and they don't need a scriptwriter. You only need a scriptwriter if you don't know what you're talking about. So the community radio program, that's very much, we talk about community organisations, we talk to local businesses. The week before last, I'd attended the Grounded Festival in Bridgetown. So that week's program was created out of two interviews I'd recorded at the festival, and two that were live interviews recorded using Zoom. So the Grounded Festival in Bridgetown was created by Matthew Evans, who was a chef in Melbourne, I think, developed a farm in Tasmania. He had a program on SBS TV, I think it's called River Farm or something like that. So he was actually looking at the process between growing food and marketing it. And he'd attended similar events in the UK with tens of thousands of people. He had the first Grounded Australia event in Tasmania at his farm last year, and the one this year was in Bridgetown. So he was live and the interview. Then I played an interview that I'd recorded there with a gentleman, American by the name of Dan Kittredge, who's founded the Bionutrient Food Association, and he's looking at foods, looking at nutrition in food, nutrition density, and developing equipment to measure that. Now this is huge because most of the food we're buying these days might look good, but it's lacking in nutrient because of our industrial agricultural system. Once we can measure the nutrient in food, that's a complete game changer because our food system has been driven by advertising. So people are eating a lot of crap that's making them sick, but once we can measure food to determine if it's nutrient dense, then the free market can work properly. And if you've got a Kansas fried cat burger that says it's full of nothing, you know that even if it's $2 or $3, it's probably not worth paying for it. And the basic problem we have as a society is that we manage the food on the basis of down and price, and in Australia we subsidise the sickness industry. Houston, we have a problem, but the internet, the best of American capitalism, you might say, has democratised the media. It's a free exchange of ideas and information. So I'm increasingly optimistic that we will get back to a true private enterprise free market environment where people who produce good food will be rewarded and those that produce crap will go by the board. That's before I came in this morning. I was listening to a podcast with Joel Salatin, who's I've known Joan. He's been brought to Western Australia, mid 2010s perhaps, by the Southwest Development Commission. He's a regenerative agriculture farmer who's sort of got the ear of Robert Kennedy now, because the whole Maha movement is a realisation that health starts in the soil. It's all about the biology in the soil, the biology in the food, the biology in the human guts. And to misquote Bill Clinton, who said it's all about the economy, stupid, and the economy's important. No illusions about that. But my take is it's all about the biology, stupid. And we're getting a scientific understanding of the importance of the biology in the soil, in the food, in the human guts. And if we get those things right, most of the health problems go away. Exciting period in history.
Absolutely. And how do you go about finding these people?
Well, I guess having been in it 25 years, you sort of, your paths have crossed with lots of people. I've met you, I think I met you through the Light Australian newspaper, so this is what's happening. I've interviewed Judy Wileman, Dr. Ian Brighthope, so next week Professor Robert Clancy, and I've rebroadcast segments that Graham Hood's done and John Campbell have done, because I can. The whole thing about copyright, people say, oh, it's breach of copyright, but the mindset within the regenerative media movement is that we're producing content. We want you to nick it and share it. I'm not claiming I own it, but I'm sharing your content. That's how we get around the gatekeepers. And whereas the mainstream media, their business model is all about controlling the narrative, and that's coming unstuck at a great rate of knots at the moment.
And your background in the radio technician side of things, well, you mentioned about studying as a youngster. Is there something more you want to tell us about that aspect of your skill set?
Well, I guess the training is very much, if you've got a fault or a problem, you need to identify the cause of the problem and then address it. I think that's what needs to happen in health as well. Instead of that, we've got a pharmaceutical industry that's based on sickness and selling products. But once you get back and address the cause of the problem and address it, then the problem goes away. Now, our economy is collapsing under the weight of the sickness industry. And Joel Salatin says, 10, 20, 30 years ago, Americans spent 18% of their income on food and 9% on the medical. Now they spend 9% on food and 18% on the medical. It's a fairly basic economic argument. If you keep doing that, you're going to collapse. But we can have these conversations, and if we address the cause of the health problems, then there's going to be money for good things in life instead of all this negative stuff.
We might take a break now, Barry, and after the break, we'll have a look at what it means that you're able to operate a radio station. Barry, we've had a look at what it takes you to operate a radio station. Now, let's have a look at what it means. What does it mean to you, your family, or the community that you're able to operate a radio station?
Well, we'll take Donnybrook Bay Community Radio. I was one of the founders of it. I think it's probably fair to say it wouldn't be there without me, but it wouldn't be there without a lot of what other people have done as well. And at the moment, Neil, he's a musician, he's in his own right, he's largely responsible for what the community radio sounds like. And he's really hit the nail on the head. A lot of people are listening. So, and when radio's a funny thing, because you sit in a radio studio sort of talking to yourself, you don't know if you're talking to yourself or not, but we, the community radio, we rely on fundraising. We have 2 or 3 raffles a year, and it's very satisfying when you're selling raffle tickets and people come, oh, I love listening to you, I don't want a ticket, but here's $50. Now, that's the sort of thing, that's the feedback we need, because that doesn't naturally happen with radio as a broadcast format. I get a buzz out of that. I'm 69. I'd love to spend more time on the farm, pottering around on the farm, which my wife would like. I'm probably a bit possessed at the moment, because my passion is to use community radio and tourist radio to tell local stories. And I'm very inspired by Aboriginal storytelling. I interviewed Gina Williams in 2015. I used to work with Gina when she was producing Milbindi, it was an Aboriginal program at UWN. She subsequently produced the first Noongar language CD called Kalyukul. And in interviewing her, I came to realise just how Aboriginal culture, and in all ancient traditional cultures, their cultural, corporate and ecological knowledge was passed down through storytelling. And what's happened in our culture, the storytelling's been taken over by the advertising executives of the major corporations, and it's brainwashing. It's the same brainwashing that Mr. Hitler employed to take a highly intelligent race of people to war against the rest of the world. This traditional knowledge is important, and what we've been through, in the pandemic of the last 5 years, our very best medical doctors were shut down. These are the elders. These are the people we should be looking to. But the elder doctors were shut down and deplatformed because of the agenda that was being pushed. That's going full cycle now. Old people know stuff. We've got this notion that the future of the world is young people, and it is. But us old people have learnt stuff along the way. We've got this problem about, peer-reviewed science, which, as Alan Savory, who's a thought leader in regenerative agriculture, says, that's a problem in that it doesn't allow new ideas. The only way you can get a peer-reviewed paper is if everybody else agrees with you. So it precludes new ideas. And as Alan said, the very best candle maker could never have invented the electric light. And this is what's happened, and this is where people like Professor Ian Brighto are so inspirational, because he's a medical doctor, or has been, but he started his career in agriculture, and if you got a 50,000, he said, I've interviewed him on community radio, so if you got a $50,000 bull, you don't look at what you can put into it, you look at what you can do to its nutrition to make it healthy. And so that's just the approach he took to medicine. And he said, so he started in production agriculture and then went into medicine as a 23-year-old. And he said, all the other medical graduate or kids come straight out of high school into medicine and been pretty much brainwashed by the pharmaceutical industry. Ian said they all called him grandpa because he was 23. But he's identified, he'd worked in agriculture and identified a problem of white muscle disease, which is a selenium deficiency. And he said once he got into medicine, he started to realise some of these heart problems, lifetime moment, this is a deficiency. And he's very much been using vitamin C, vitamin D as a therapeutic. And he's been shut down by the system because there's no money in it. But of course, that's what's making people sick. So I don't know if I answered your question. I tend to go off on tangents. Sorry about that.
What I'm getting out of that, what I'm getting out of that from a meaning perspective, is that you're able to get those stories about the various views that are out there through to your community, which is giving your community an important perspective on what's going on around them, and that can result in them thinking critically about what's going on.
I think that's right. I think I'm fortunate. I'm a volunteer on community radio. I'm sort of semi-retired, so it's really quite liberating. Now, this is what's been the failure of the last 5 years, because the journalistic profession has failed. The so-called professional journalists haven't been able to question anything because they need their job to pay their mortgage. And on community radio, I've been able to question the narrative because if I get the sack, it doesn't matter. And all those conversations are online for the record. And the first one I did that I think was really quite significant was with Dr. Judy Wileman back in April 2022. Dr. Judy Wileman was a high school science teacher in the 90s, started to see diseases coming through, conditions coming through that weren't there before. Being a questioning mind, she investigated it and started to look into the vaccination policy. She didn't come as an anti-vaxxer, but she was, just questioning the thing. And in that interview I did in 2022, she's saying, all the childhood diseases that we're told the vaccines have eliminated, they were down to almost nothing by the 50s because of improved nutrition and improved hygiene. And the vaccines only came out in the 60s. So this has been completely misrepresented. Now, that interview I did with Judy in 2022, I also said, this was at a point where I decided I wasn't going to participate in Greg Hunt's vaccine trial and had been shut out of society. But I was interviewing Judy and I said, I can't get thalidomide out of my mind. He said, exactly right. So now this was a trial drug that was given to a very limited subset of the population. We had our government mandating our population to participate in what the health minister at the time, Greg Hunt, called a vaccine trial. That doesn't pass the pub test. And I said then, it's with great trepidation that I even talk about this. Now, at that stage, I wasn't convinced I'd done the right thing by not getting the jab. This is in April 2022. But I had followed the advice of a local nutritionist, vitamin C, vitamin D and zinc. Now, in May 2022, both my wife and I had COVID. I was bloody lethargic for a few days, but that was the limit of it. And when I'd interviewed Ian Brighto, he'd said to the Prime Minister, because he was Professor of Integrative Medicine, he'd said to ScoMo, he said, get people onto vitamin C, vitamin D and zinc. This thing's over in 6 weeks. But they didn't want to know about it. But that interview I did with Judy is still online. And I think it's like a good wine. It's actually improved with keeping.
I actually listened to it yesterday.
There you go. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's there for the record. It's also stored offline just in case. Because, when I was talking to Robin, who's managing editor of Light Australia, she was talking about how a lot of what's online is being scrubbed. That's why the Light Australian newspaper is so important, because it's hard copy. Whatever they try and do on the internet, physical hard copy is still there. RFK's book about Anthony Fauci, Peter McCulloch's written a book called Vaccines, Mythology, Ideology and Reality. Now, this is a highly esteemed American medical man who was, lauded all around the world before 2020, and then he was deplatformed. He's got his platform back now, and he's looking into this, and he's saying, none of this made any sense to us because we were looking for treatments for this disease, but they didn't want to know about it. And across the world, the fanfare of the vaccine, and it was all driven by the World Health Organization. But Dr. Peter McCulloch's got a platform now, and he's got a brilliant little 2-minute segment which I played on Donnybrook Balingham Community Radio in a conversation with Robin from the Light Australian newspaper. It's online for the record. You can share it. And this is how we get around the gatekeepers. So I don't have a big following, and that suits me. Probably quite a good thing. I haven't had a profile. I've been flying under the radar, but all those conversations are online for the record.
So you've built an important slice of history that will be there for as long as it can be there.
Absolutely. And, there's lots of talk about oral histories, and they're really important. But what we're doing, we've been recording the oral history as it's happening. And I think that's a significant part.
Yes, I record my oral histories as audio programs because there's a mismatch between the age of the individual doing the recording and what they're talking about. So that creates a conflict in the mind, really, about that. So what you're able to do now brings those two together, and it's probably what everybody should be doing for their own personal history as well. But I can help you with that.
Yeah.
But that whole concept of getting that record in a timely manner before it gets burnt off by something trying to attack it.
Yeah, and then the beauty of it with the technology it's a double-edged sword, but it has democratised the media. Like when I started at GWN, Kerry State was spending something like $75,000 for each new camera and recorder. You know, the camera recorder in your phone is better than what the poor old Kerry is spending $75,000 on it. So that the cost of the media meant that, you know, the corporates had control of the narrative. Well, they've lost control of the narrative, and so, you know, that all goes well for the future.
So Barry, you've done lots of important work as a radio station operator to make sure that there's a lot of meaning in what you do, creating those histories, getting those stories out. That's been an amazing part of the work that you do. We'll have a break now, and after the break, we'll have a look at how you do it. We've had a look at how much it means that Barry is able to operate a radio station. Now, let's have a look at how you do it. Barry, if somebody wanted to start a radio station now, what would you suggest that they do?
Well, the tourist radio, there are limited number of licences. I've actually got licences in Denmark, Mount Barker, Kalgoorlie, a place like that, which I'd love to get on air in partnership with local people. I can't do it on my own. I don't want to be the voice of Kalgoorlie, but if somebody out in Kalgoorlie wants to work with us on that, I would love that. Community radio, if somebody wants to establish a community radio station, in the cities it's more difficult, but in the regions it's relatively easier in that the distance between the stations means that it's easier to get a frequency in regional Australia. Now, Busselton is the only halfway reasonable sized town in the southwest that doesn't have a community radio station. Now, I challenged Busselton to get a community radio. It won't compete with my tourist radio in Busselton. The two are complementary. So to get a community station up in any town, and I know Bridgetown's been trying, you've got to establish a community organisation, an incorporated body, to then run and operate it. And anybody who's looking as far as a community station, I'd urge you to look at the CBAA, Community Broadcast Association of Australia. They are set up to assist in these stations, and DBCR has been a member of CBAA since we incorporated. They've been invaluable to us. We've actually now in the southwest, through CBAA funding, been able to employ a tech to sort of support all of the southwest stations, which has been huge, because that has been a problem. Because in many respects, you know, my background's a radio. Us radio techs have become a bit like blacksmiths, but you know, there is absolutely a need for those. And what's happened with the networking of the mainstream stations, where you used to have techs and local presenters all around the state, we've largely lost them. And that's where community radio stations are filling that void.
So while it sounds like it's a largish project to take on, it's really about a few people getting themselves together, having a common goal, setting up the association bits and pieces is pretty much application form and writing some objectives and things like that. But it's about people getting together, isn't it?
Absolutely. In fact, I just came across an article from the Preston Press, our local paper, from 2011 when we were incorporated. Actually it was at the first public meeting we held, which then formed a steering committee, and out of that the treasurer at the time is still our treasurer, Jackie, who is on the board. She's still on the board. And I sort of said, we probably need about $100,000. We actually did our own fundraising for the basics. We got access to the building that the Lions Club, which is actually a council building, but the Lions Club had access to it. We did all the work ourselves. The technical stuff we worked through a broadcast engineer, so we got a bit of council funding for him to do the applications for the licence, because that's a whole can of worms that, I'm the tech, but I don't understand bureaucracy. Horses for courses, and that's not my course. But so Mike Ryan was the broadcast engineer, but even this tech that we have now, who's under CBAA, you probably help. And once we get that set up, then the lotteries is a funding source. The equipment these days, we've got a few computers. We've got a program called Station Playlist, which has all the music, and we set up the parameters of the program, and it automatically generates a playlist which just sits there burbling away on its own 24 hours a day. And when we've got live presenters come in, they can either bring in their own playlist and play their music, or they can take it out of the system station. So my program is, say, business and community conversations. It's mostly conversations, but there's music as well, and I just sort of take what's there, or if there's a particular song that sort of fits in with the theme of the conversation, well, I can play that. And it's much better to have live presenters, but in the absence of live presenters, well, we run under the automation system.
So from that side of things, you can easily fill up 24 hours of content. You could literally automate it start to finish.
Yep.
And then enhance it with appropriately timed live segments.
Absolutely.
And build from there. So if you engage people to do some of the technical work, you could probably run it with a group of 4 or 5 people. Yeah,
it's the luck of the draw in terms of whether you bring the right people in. When we started, we've had a few individuals that have been really significant in our development. They weren't in the business plan, but they turned up when the time was right. And I guess that's, created an outcome sort of thinking. You've got to have that positive approach, because if we looked at all the good things, the things that could have gone wrong, we'd have never started. But once you start it starts to gain that sort of momentum. And I said earlier in the piece, that under the Community Radio Charter, we exist to give a voice to the community. So I said, the commercial stations tend to focus on a narrow demographic. Community stations, our demographic is people in Donnybrook Balingup. It can be all ages. So, by definition, you're not going to make everybody happy all the time. So I said, if there aren't times that you don't want to listen, we're not complying with our charter. So, if you want country music, you might want to listen, or if you don't like country music, you won't want to listen. And that's just how it is. And some of the conversations I've had in the last 4 years, people haven't wanted to hear. That's democracy. They're free to turn it off. But I did a piece, it's when I was talking to Ian Brighto recently, because the Community Radio CBAA has a code of practice. And the code of practice includes the line that the community radio stations exist to provide a voice for members of the community not represented in mainstream media. So I said, to me, that well and truly justifies talking to Professor Ian Brighto, because he represents the over 1 million Australians who didn't participate in the vaccine trial, or have been many more that have been injured via the vaccines that haven't had a voice in the mainstream media. On community radio, we're giving those people a voice. And last year, I had the CEO of CBAA, John Bissett, talking on the radio about community radio, and that was prompted by a letter. You remember letters, things that come in the mail?
No, I've never seen one.
Oh, right. Well, they used to exist, and they, a bloke would write something down, and fold it up and put it in an envelope and put a stamp on it and stick it in the hole, and it would turn up at your address. And anyway, so we got this letter from CBAA about the 50th year of community radio. I thought, well, this is fantastic, because I read it. See, I get emails from them every day that I never read. So emails become incredibly efficient, but if nobody reads them, they're not that efficient. So anyway, I read this letter and I thought, this is really good. How about coming on my community radio show and talk about community radio, John? So he did. So we had this live community interview, and we talked about that very point. And, technology is great. I've been in technology all my life, but it's not everything. And as I say, I read this letter because it came as a letter. And radio, that's in the category, it's old technology. People dismiss it as old technology, but it's actually more important than ever. And the podcasts and the recordings gives it the longevity that it never had before. But the thing that John said, because I've been looking to CBAA for sort of moral support for the way I've been challenging the COVID narrative, and it hasn't been there. But what John did say was the function of the media is to hold government to account. That's what I've been trying to do. Haven't had a whole lot of support, but it's all online for the record. Absolutely. And stored offline just in case. And now we're generating transcripts So if you don't want to listen to a 20-minute piece, if you're a speed reader, which I'm not, you can read it in a minute or two, and you can print it out and you can store it offline. So if all this stuff keeps getting scrubbed off the internet because it doesn't suit the narrative, you've got the hard copy, mate. Checkmate.
Well, thank you very much, Barry, for being on Forest Chat. It's been great having you here.
Thanks for the opportunity, Paul. It's Charlie Massey, who's the doyen of regenerative agriculture, brought to Western Australia in 2018 by Alana McTiernan, the then Labor Agriculture Minister. He gave a presentation standing up alongside Alana, and he said, change has got to come from the bottom up. It simply can't come from the top down, because the people at the top fought to get there and they like it the way it is. We are part of that, what Charlie Massey calls the underground revolution.
Well, all the best with your future endeavours, Barry. We look forward to what happens with Western Tourist Radio and Donnybrook Barlingup Community Radio.
It all starts with a conversation.
Absolutely. You've been listening to Forest Chat, where we talk about individual endeavour in Western Australia, what it takes, what it means, and how you do it. I'm your host, Paul Vandermeer, and in today's episode we're talking with Barry Green about operating a radio station. Remember, there are 4 ways to get involved with Forest Chat. Share the domain forest.chat with your friends and family and people that you meet. When you sign up for emails, you get advance notice of the episodes. Listen to the episodes at forest.chat/episodes. If you do something interesting and think you would be a good guest on Forest.chat, then go to forest.chat/interview. If you want to support a small business, go to forest.chat/advert. I'm looking forward to joining you for our next guest. Until then, enjoy making it happen.